Goku once said. Goku once said.
悟空はかつて言った。
That life is like a box of chocolates.
その人生はチョコレートの箱のようなものです。
Crane and pigeons, deep in the forest of endlessly limited truths, where the night never ends. The grapes dangled with a precarious beauty upon branches that rustled softly amidst the waves of a smooth evening breeze. Those branches themselves laid safely in the cradle of the trunk. Though it twisted and turned into a pronounced way, it remained the sturdiest in the entire forest, sure-footed amongst the other trees, whose stood wobbly and bare. Amongst the upper reaches, where the branches began to dissolve into twigs, and the foliage of plump leaves were their thickest, delicately perched a crane. Dressed in rainbow-lined feathers of white, blinding in how they reflected the soft moonlight, the crane swayed with an effortless fluidity to the tune of the branch's rhythm, yet kept its long, sleek legs firmly attached to the tree at all times. Thus so was the two beings' existence, as was everything in the forest, a confusing collection of contradictions that somehow manifest themselves into existence, unresolved. The surrounding pigeons of the forest didn't care much for the display. Amongst their dull, gray masses, it was an unwritten agreement to reject its existence. It hadn't wronged them, nor were they offended by it. They didn't actually know why they had decided upon this. Some tried to explain this, arguing pigeons should focus on pigeons and the trees pigeons reside in, and not other birds and their trees, or believing that the display was an illusion altogether. That it served no purpose but to make the pigeons feel lesser. But as a collective, they lacked any justification for their agreement, their reasoning was too fragmented. Thus, they stubbornly stuck to their own trees, endlessly trying to justify the existence of their homes. Though the beauty of them were a point of contention, they all remained adamant that theirs were, at the very least, the sturdiest of them all. "How can you be so sure of the sturdiness of your tree?" inquired the crane. "I can feel its sturdiness," replied the pigeons. "It doesn't snap in the wind, so it must be the firmest in the ground, compared to the rest." "But what is your perception of sturdiness?" continued the crane. "Just because you find it to be sturdy, doesn't mean it is the same sort of sturdy to everyone." The pigeons grew frustrated. Well, some other pigeons came along and tried it out. They all agreed that it's sturdy. "So it is most surely so, without doubt." "Even then, you aren't the tree. So, we don't know whether the tree itself thinks it is sturdy or not. It's beyond us birds." The pigeons refused to concede. "Then where are we supposed to perch? If we can't know the sturdiness of the trees, why don't we just fly until the end of time?" The crane smiled softly. "That is the confusing beauty of this forest. To find the sturdiest tree, you have to accept you will never find it, yet search as if you will. And even in doing that, even when you find that one specific tree, it still won't be the sturdiest tree. We are, after all, but birds. We aren't trees." The crane's explanation quickly slipped from the pigeons' minds, and they carried on proclaiming the sturdiness of their own trees, this time escalating to bickering, and, inevitably, fights between the pigeons over whose tree was sturdier. These conflicts began spanning months, years, generations, and then eons, the passage of time becoming nothing more than a blur of violence, hatred and despair. Deeply saddened, the crane made a proposal. "Us birds shouldn't be fighting amongst ourselves. How about you come to my tree? That way we can all learn to love one another, instead of our lives being wasted away by fruitless conflicts." The pigeons scoffed. "Why should we? You yourself said no tree in this forest is the sturdiest." "Yes, I did. So why should we bother coming over to your tree? Because the sturdiness of the tree is irrelevant to us, is it not? If we feel it is satisfactory, is that not enough?" With hesitation, the pigeons took the crane up on their offer. As they were preparing to flock over, they had one final question. "What's the catch?" "You have to die. Whether or not that is a catch, well, as with everything in this forest, it just depends on how you see it." Assuming the crane had made that answer in jest, the pigeons flocked together, and settled on the tree. They naturally congregated around the middle of the tree, in a dense and tight band of even concentration. Though the pigeons were uncomfortable being so densely packed, they eventually warmed up to the crane and its tree, and their previous bitterness seemingly faded away. The sun's confidence blossomed, and decided to rise, forcing the moon to bitterly retreat from the forest. Inevitably though, the pigeons got restless. The band was too tight, and they wanted to spread out. Competition thus quickly broke out as to who could get closest to the crane's highly perched position. Some began pushing through, forcing themselves to the higher echelons of the tree at the expense of the others, claiming that it was the crane's will for them to climb so high. But I said nothing of the sort. The crane cried. But their cries fell on deaf ears. The pigeons continued to fight amongst themselves, many eventually giving up, and falling into place under the command of pigeons perched higher. In just a short amount of time from the original migration, the pigeons now existed in two distinct groups. Those perched just below the crane's feet, and those who hugged just above the base of the tree, in an even tighter and more uncomfortable band than previously. Disappointed, the crane decided to drop off its perch, and flew down to land just below the lower band of pigeons, perching only centimeters above the ground. The lower pigeons were perplexed, asking why the crane had done such a thing. No answer came from the crane. It simply sat there, catching the dirt and grime that fell off the pigeons, dulling its white feathers and rainbow glimmer. As the lower pigeons soon forgot their confusion, they all began to stare maliciously at the crane and berate it, testing its patience. Finally, they could be just like the higher pigeons, having so much be below them, at their mercy. They experienced a power trip like no other. Despite this, the crane was unbothered. It continued to stare upwards, toward its old place, amongst the finely branched canopy, to see the upper pigeons attempting to seize it while the lower ones were distracted. Tried as they might though, they simply couldn't perch where the crane once did. They lacked grace, the twigs snapping under their feet, and their balance out of sync with the tree's ebb and flow. Eventually, they gave up trying to reach the absolute top, where the crane perched, rather diverting their focus to perching as highly as possible. If not the absolute top, at least higher than any of the rest. This competition slowly chipped away at the tree. Twigs broke, grapes lost their grip, plummeting to the ground to smash into pulp, and the tree screamed in pain. "Stop!" cried the crane. "You are hurting the tree. This isn't why you are here." The pigeons didn't listen. They continued to fight and compete, damaging the tree further and further, ears deaf to the tree's cries, as the crane watched in horror, past the lower pigeons' ridicule and beratement. Eventually, enough was enough. Furious, the tree burst into flames at its base, keen on driving the pigeons away. The lower pigeons began to panic, while the upper pigeons remained oblivious to it all. The crane spread its wings, ready to fly up to stop the upper pigeons. But, as its wings made their first flap, the flames licked them, setting them ablaze in a blinding flash. Nevertheless, the crane flew up, against its pain, to the upper pigeons. It could have stopped, and rubbed the fire back onto the tree, dooming both the upper and lower pigeons in a completely inescapable blaze. Yet, it didn't, because it knew it wasn't the right thing to do. It knew that, if the cycle were to stop, it would be with them, and not the pigeons. But the crane's time was short. Not even able to mutter a word, it used every last ounce of its strength to soar past the upper pigeons, warning them of the flames below. The upper pigeons stopped their bickering, staring in horror as the flaming crane flew by. And with that, the flames stopped, the lower pigeons, the upper pigeons, and the tree itself, all safe. Yet the crane remained ablaze. With one last flap, and a croak in its soft chirp, it gracefully plummeted to the ground, leaving a trail of somberly beautiful embers, fleeting as they danced about the air. It burned brightly and dazzlingly, before sizzling out when it lightly touched the ground, to then be absorbed by the tree's roots, rejuvenating it and giving it a new life of renewed twigs, bigger fruit and denser leaves. And with that, the eternal night was avoided, but the sun wept bitterly. The upper and lower pigeons convened at the middle of the tree to mourn the crane's passing. They wept endlessly and went on about how it was a senseless death, an injustice far surpassing the bounds of the forest. Yet, they never considered why the crane had died. They continued their ignorance, refusing any notion that their actions may have been what led to it all. The sun continued to weep. Yes, there was peace, but it knew it to only be temporary, and soon the divide between the pigeons grew again, the tree being damaged even more in the upper pigeons' battles to be above the rest. Yet again, the tree went ablaze in fury, and, with no crane to save them, many pigeons died in the fires, and the rest had to abandon the tree. Shakily watching in horror from the surrounding trees as the majestic being dissolved into embers, just only realizing what they lost. Eventually, the last embers died down, and the tree was no more. Only a humble, unscathed bunch of grapes remained, glistening a vivid purple in the dying breaths of sunlight. "What will we do?" the pigeons collectively asked. "Let's plant it," the lower pigeons suggested. "That way it will regrow, and we will have it as a home once more." "The whole thing," the upper pigeons objected. "We can't do that. Look how tasty and delectable it is." "But do we have any right to do that? What would the crane think?" The crane would be fine with it. It said that if we find a tree sturdy enough, that is enough for us, right? So let's just find another tree, and reap the rewards of what the previous one left. The lower pigeons, though feeling it to be a disservice to their old home, could not resist. Alright, but leave one grape to plant. Even if it is stunted, at least something will grow. Hesitantly and begrudgingly, the upper pigeons plucked a grape and set it on the ground. Alright then, let's go. Aren't we going to plant it? We aren't just going to leave it, right? Of course not, we will come back to plant it. It's just that we need to find a new tree first, before anything else. The lower pigeons didn't bother objecting. They knew they already overstepped the boundaries of the upper pigeons' patience by just getting them to pluck the grape off the bunch, and that they now weren't going to have anything but their way. Besides, they reasoned, it couldn't hurt to put it off for at least a while. Thus, all the pigeons collectively set out towards the furthest reaches of the forest, looking for some tree to call home. The sun continued to weep, enough to become a moon. The original moon came out to join the newly formed one, and the eternal night thus became more intense than ever before. Many years, centuries, millennia, and eons passed. The pigeons did not return, they never settled, becoming fragmented once again. The grape remained unplanted. It was forgotten about, along with all the pigeons' grievances of the past. All they were concerned about now were their wobbly trees, and whose were the sturdiest.